Hi everybody, I'm Katie Jester, and I'm with Sunrise Solar, and I'm here today with Dave Castle, my colleague, and we're here to talk to you about what solar looks like for farmers and some of the great incentives that are out there to help you be able to afford to do this and to be able to take control of that energy bill that you've got going on. So I want to thank everybody for showing up, and Miss Jenny and the Extension Office for giving us the opportunity to speak today and to come out and talk to you guys. And thanks to Drew, because he did start you out in the right direction. Energy efficiency is always a great idea. It means you need a smaller solar system, which means it's less expensive up front. So what I'm mainly going to talk about today is the solar incentives, the USDA REAP grant, which did increase in value. Maryland has a commercial clean energy rebate. Are you guys all Maryland, or do I have Delaware here as well? We have a couple Delaware. Okay, so depending on which power company you're with, that state grant is different. So if you're DEC, it's a smaller grant. If you're with Delmarva, it's a little bit larger grant. So, and we would sit down and do an individual thing of what things are available to each individual person. So, and there's of course some great tax incentives, your SRECs or solar renewable energy credits, just controlling that overhead, the utility overhead. So the REAP grant is the big one, and it's big talk right now because it did go from 25% to 50% with the Inflation Reduction Act. So everybody's looking at that right now. So, and what that means is 50% of what you spend on a solar system or energy efficiencies, certain energy efficiencies that qualify, you could get 50% of that paid for by USDA REAP, okay? It does have caps, but those caps are pretty high. If you're doing just solar, it's $1 million. If you're doing solar and energy efficiency, it's $1 million on solar and it's $500,000 on energy efficiencies. They do have rolling deadlines now. It used to just be once a year that you could apply. Now we're doing it quarterly, which is really nice. So the next up and coming deadline for that is June 30th, and then September 30th, and we'll go every quarter beyond that. And it is a competitive grant, so it is not guaranteed. So if we have more people apply for it than what they have money for, not everyone will get it, but then we can move you to the next session and reapply. The commercial clean energy rebate is a Maryland option. If you're ground mounted, you have to be under 250 kW. If you're a roof mounted one, you can be 375 kW. And it does max out at 20 on the ground and 30 on the roof, but gives you kind of an idea. And then there's of course tax credits. There is the ITC, or Federal Investment Tax Credit, which gives you 30% of what you spend on it as a credit, and you can depreciate it just like any other piece of equipment you purchased. And solar is tax exempt when it comes to like your property taxes, so it doesn't increase your property tax. And then we have our SRECs, our solar renewable energy credits. That is something that it's your carbon offsets. Power companies and large companies are working towards having lower emissions, and so they buy your renewable energy credits. For every 1,000 kilowatt hours you make, you produce 1 REC. Those can be sold on the open market. Current values somewhere around $60. That rate does vary, but we expect there to be a market for that pretty much forever. So he's asking is if your farm is in preservation, are there restrictions on the solar? So the restrictions on that would be that you can do solar for your use. You cannot do like community solar on it or things like that.
Can you still use the credits?
Yes. Even if you are in conservation, you can still get the credits. You just, there are some restrictions about what you can and can't do. Like you can't put in the community solar one. but you can put in for the use on that farm. And then the next big one is, of course, controlling your utility overhead. I mean, we all need electricity, and we have to be able to turn those fans on and feed and water those birds. So we're going to be spending it. This is just, in Maryland and in Delaware, there is one-to-one credits. So you get, for every kilowatt hour you produce, you get a credit. For every kilowatt hour you pull off of the grid, they take a credit away. So you get paid same coming and going, which is a really nice benefit. And in Maryland and Delaware, Delaware can, even for non-agricultural, but in Maryland, agricultural and nonprofits can aggregate net meter. So if you have several chicken houses, and like these 2 chicken houses are on one meter and these 2 chicken houses are on the other meter, you can put one system in and then have the credits offset both meters. Or if you have one farm here and one farm there, as long as they're on the same utility, then, so you have to be Maryland on the same utility or Delaware the same utility, and you could build one system and offset multiple meters. Okay. So just wanted to give you guys a quick example of what we're looking at here. This is an example of a 2 chicken house situation, and they're spending just over $19,000 a year in energy costs, okay, in electricity. So on that, their system took about 100 kW solar system to offset their usage. That system cost $265,800, okay? The REAP grant, now, the REAP does not cover any residential. So a lot of you guys know that, like, you have 2 chicken houses and your house is connected to that same meter. You're all on one meter there. So the amount that your house is using for your personal residence, we pull that off of that grant. But so the grant portion is about $117,000. They qualify for the Maryland grant, and they're getting about $15,000 in that. The federal tax credit on that is $79,740. You can take that all in 1 year if you want, or you can spread that over as many as 20 years. So just depending on what works out best for you tax-wise. You can depreciate it. You can do bonus depreciation with these, but most people don't. So I'm showing you what the total depreciation typically would be, and then a 1-year value on that, to give you guys an idea. SRECs, I like to look at a 10-year period. So I'll show you kind of the full 10 years there at $38,900, and then a 1-year value on that is about $6,395 in SRECs. And then you get their energy savings, okay? So in this bill, they're saving $18,997 of their $19,000. So there is going to be customer fees. There's always that set customer fee that solar doesn't cover. But that leaves them at the end of 1 year having spent $20,386 left on the solar system. So you can see how quickly, you would go from having put money out to putting money back in your pocket and saving on your utility costs. Of course, this can scale up. You end up with an 8 chicken house situation. And there you are at over $120,000 a year in utility expense. Of course, that means everything scales up. So on this example, they needed like a 432 kW system. So they needed a bigger system because they're using a lot more energy. Cost of the system is about $915,500. The grant on this case, they didn't have any residential usage associated with their accounts on this, so we could do the straight 50%. So that grant is $457,750, okay? So it's a big grant. They're too big to get the Maryland Clean Energy Grant, so that drops off. But they still are getting the federal tax credit at $274,650. They're still depreciating it. It's $194,000 worth of depreciation over the 6 years, but the first year they depreciate about $38,000. Their SRECs, because they're producing a lot more, are worth a lot more up front. Their SRECs are worth about $25,770 in 1 year. And then their energy savings is 107. Now, that's not a total energy savings because they still have customer fees and they still have demand charges. That KW charge from the peaks of everything coming on, like Drew was talking about earlier. So, but their energy savings is about 107,000 a year, and that leaves them with 11,419. Okay. So, and that's really all I had. I just wanted to give you kind of a quick overview of what these grants look like and how that kind of could work out for farmers. Does anybody have any questions? So the question is, how long does it take for the grant money to typically get to you? The USDA REAP grant, once the system is activated, it has to be up and running for a full month, and then you would apply and get your funds. So I always tell people it's 2 to 3 months after the system is turned on for the REAP grant. The Maryland grants would take, about 8 to 12 weeks for them to get processed and get to you. SRECs trickle in. You typically get paid quarterly for SRECs. The tax benefits are, of course, when you file your taxes. For the REAP grant, you have to apply beforehand before anything starts. We have to apply for the grant. You can start construction before you're awarded the grant, but then you're taking the risk of, if you didn't get selected, not getting it. We a lot of times do what we call contingent upon grant. So and then on that REAP grant, you can sign a contract with us. I will write the grant for you and get everything going. We can say, we can get the word back from USDA that yes, you got it, and then we can start the system. Yep. On the Maryland grant, it's a non-competitive grant, but it's a first come, first serve, which basically means the first person who applies gets it until they run out of money. You can apply beforehand to get the money reserved for you. It starts out as each state is allocated a certain amount of money, and then after they have gone through the process for basically the whole year, they will say, okay, this state didn't use all of their money, so then it goes into a national pool, and then they will select from a national pool. But it is state by state to start with. Each state is allocated a different amount of money. The question from Chop Tank is, are we checking to make sure the grid still has capacity? And yes, it's one of the first things that we're going to do when you call us. We're going to say, oh, what utility do you have and where do you live at? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to end up pulling up the map and going, you're good. Or we're going to pull up the map and say, okay, you're on a restricted circuit, which means that there's enough solar on there that the utility can't take, too much more, and say, okay, sometimes you're restricted to a smaller system. Sometimes, the circuit just has so much on it that they just can't take any more at this time.
Well, and just to clarify that for anybody that's a little bit confused, we can only take as much energy as somebody's using in that area,
Right.
in the substation area, right?
Right.
We can't ship it back up onto the grid and send it to Montgomery County where they need electricity. So
Right.
we have to balance that load within that
Right.
substation.
Yeah, which makes it more difficult for Chop Tank and your smaller utilities than it does for Delmarva Power, who,
Users and more demand.
yes, because they don't allow Chop Tank to push it back onto their grid.
Are those maps available for anyone?
Yes, those maps are available on Chop Tank, Delmarva's, DEC's websites. There's a spot to go and you can actually get the map and see whether you're in a restricted grid or not. In the back first. Off the two-phase feeder, or so it just depends on exactly what you've got going on. Typically, we would do what we call line side taps for you guys. So it's basically going to tap between your meter or between your panel box and the meter, and it just depends on exactly how it works. We can use single phase, three phase, whichever. We can adjust the system to work with what you have. So we would look into that when we're doing the costing for you. So the question there was, is the cost of like upgrades from the utility and things like that, or running 3-phase to the spot where it needs to be, is that included in the price? So with us, not with All Solar, but with us, we would start doing those kind of calculations, and we would start contacting the utility and saying, hey, this guy's planning on doing this, what do we need to do to be able to put this in? You need to upgrade this transformer, you need this. So we start adding those costs in so that you see that cost up front. So the question there is there financing available, and do we do energy storage as well? So yes, on both, there is financing available. We do have a financing company that we can work with you with right through us, that's kind of set up with us, and we can kind of show you what the rates and everything is for that. But your general bank will finance this as well. We have done lots of different loans with the credit unions, and Mid-Atlantic Farm Credit I've seen them fund quite a few of them. Yep. Yeah, as you're sitting next to the guy. Yeah. So yes. So it is a combination. You do have to, when you go to get your financing, when you're going to apply for the REAP grant, you do need to show that you have financing in place before we turn the grant in. It's one of the criteria, which, it can be really simple as just a letter from the bank that says, he has a loan for this, he's covered. We've worked with Farm Credit multiple times with this, and what he said is one of the things I always say to customers when they're talking to the bank. I'm like, check with them about doing 2 loans, a real short-term one for this grant, and then the other one for the rest of it, because then your payments are a lot less. So it makes your cash flow a lot easier without having to, redo your loan to knock your payments back down. Yep. And storage-wise, we do offer storage. There are grants available for storage as well. Storage is a harder one to do. It is a little bit expensive, and it's kind of hard to make it pencil sometimes. But if you're paying a lot of demand fees, that's how you would mitigate demand, would be to use storage. So it would be my guys that would. Yep. We have our own. We have a couple different companies that we would buy the actual batteries from, but it's Air Design guys and our installers that would install it. We do pretty much everything in-house. Okay, so he's asking time frame of the process. The design can be pretty quick. The initial design and initial pricing, we basically get electric bills from you. If we can get 12 months of electric bills, that's really helpful, because it helps us break out that demand, and kind of show you the fluctuation of where you're at, because there's going to be certain months you're going to use way more than other months. So we want to see the fluctuation. And we could, in under a week, give you a, design and pricing. And then from there, we would start tweaking it, and, it takes about, if you're not doing grants, you can basically, a week, we can do that. The minute you sign, we start doing interconnections and permitting, which, I always tell people interconnections and permitting take 4 to 8 weeks, depending on what's going on. And then, it doesn't take long for our guys to install. A lot of times we're there a week, and our guys are out, and then we're just doing inspections and getting certifications and permission to operate. And then you're up and running. So he's asking about design fees. So no, Sunrise Solar will design them for you for free as part of our service. Right. So and that's one of the things we really have to look at, and that's part of the reason why we want to see your electric bills, and we want to take a look at where you're putting it, and other so the question basically was, he's saying he's looked at some quotes from other solar companies, and the financing, once he went to get the loan, and they said, okay, this is how far we'll let you do the loan at, the cost of his loan, what he was going to pay, was more than his bill from the power company. And that can happen, you know, depending on what's going on, depending on what kind of upgrades you have, depending on, you know, what rate you're at, and things like that. So, and sometimes we can look at it and we can say, okay, here's things to do that would make the cost of your system go down to, you know, help you get to that better spot. But sometimes we look at it and we go, this just isn't the time for you to do this. You know, you're sitting at a spot where, you know, it's not making sense. But, you know, a lot of times, especially with these grants and things, it becomes really easy to make it make sense. So the REAP grant is set up, they're doing 6 sessions of it at this time at the 50%. Yeah, I think it's 6 of them. So, and then at that point, the 6 quarter, yeah. Yeah, it's a year and a half of it, really. 6, yeah. So, and then once that's done, then they, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if they're going to renew it back at 50% or if it will drop back to the original 25%, because that's what it has been for years and years, is 25%. It's just the Inflation Reduction Act happened and they got extra money from that to put into this. So that's what they did. Application fees for it, the way that we would handle that is we would take a deposit up front to write the grant. So application fees for doing the grant. The REAP grant's the only one we do this because it's quite extensive. We would take a deposit up front on that. That would be, you know, a smaller deposit, like a couple $1,000s, and that would be non-refundable. But if you get the grant and you go, we just roll that back into the cost of the system. Is how we handle that. Are you Delaware or are you Maryland? Maryland, yeah.